The saying goes, a best friend is one soul abiding in two bodies. It's an unbreakable bond that stands the test of time.
They really believed they were family. They were sisters, not biological sisters, but they referred to themselves as sisters and best friends.
They spent a lot of time together, you know. All the things the teenage girls did, they did together, and they were inseparable.
And when a woman finds love in a partner, it's an even deeper soul tie that knows no bounds.
Nice looking guy, tall, brown skinned, muscular, very well dressed, smelled so good.
I thought that he was a real respectful young man. He had a strong faith in God.
Sometimes what appears to be true love is nothing but pure evil.
He had started controlling and dominating her life.
She had cuts along her face. The road rash on her was terrible. Her clothes were tattered and torn.
But relentless devotion to a lover can sever the tight bonds of friendship.
Women are put into positions to where they end up doing something that they don't necessarily want to do because of the actions of their partners.
And she just kept saying, they're going to kill me, they're going to kill me.
October 17, 2015, Dearborn, Michigan.
Dearborn is approximately 26 square miles. It sits on the west side of Detroit. Detroit borders it on three sides of our city.
It is a good mix of every different nationality background with a lot of culture in it.
Just before midnight, a man driving along Interstate 94 spots a terrifying sight. A woman, obviously badly hurt, running across the highway and waving her arms for help.
She was saying, hey, I've been kidnapped. I need help immediately. They're going to come back and kill me. She just kept saying, they're going to kill me. They're going to kill me.
The woman jumps into the man's car and begs for help. Thankfully, there's a gas station still open at the bottom of the off-ramp.
Detroit police officers just happened to be at the gas station when this car pulled up, and the gentleman got out and said, I have this girl. She just jumped in my car. She said she was kidnapped. Police started looking at him, believing he might have been involved somehow, because her injuries were so extensive that they just couldn't believe this story that they were hearing.
Officers turn to the injured woman and try to get more information about what's happened.
The injured woman identified herself as 21-year-old LaToya Britton.
LaToya was born in the Detroit area and was raised by her mother. As a teenager, she never had trouble making friends.
I met LaToya in 8th grade, and since then, me and LaToya have been thick as thieves, best friends.
LaToya and Patricia, they spent a lot of time together, you know, going to dinner, talking to boys, dressing alike, all the things the teenage girls did, they did together, and they were inseparable. LaToya came from a one-parent home. It was just her mother raising her. So she did happen to spend quite a bit of time at our home.
We was, man, like sisters. She called my mama and daddy, mama and daddy. She was the first person I told I was pregnant. She was the only one I knew. She was like 15.
With the baby's father out of the picture, Patricia leaned on LaToya for support.
Most girls would say, you know what, we're not on the same level anymore. But she just maintained that friendship, that bond with Patricia.
Patricia also relied on her close and loving family.
We had a beautiful bungalow house, me and my mom, my dad. That was nice. I just went to school, took my baby to daycare, and I had support of my mom and dad.
A lot of times when we think about young mothers who haven't finished high school, they feel like, oh, my life is over, I have to raise a child, there's nothing left for me. But Patricia wasn't that way. She still wanted to finish high school.
I'm getting older. I didn't want to live with my parents anymore. I wanted to provide. I wanted to work. I decided I love to cook. By then, I was working at the hospital as a cook.
Living on her own, Patricia still stayed tight with her folks, and together they found a new church.
I was active in church, she was active in church, and we just was there, a permanent fixture.
For Patricia, church soon became about more than just a rousing sermon. There was also a handsome man who caught her eye.
Nice looking guy, tall, brown skinned, muscular, very well dressed, smelled so good.
Patricia sees Terrell Smith in church and thought that she may have found a good one this time. He's into church and he's interacting with her young son.
I thought that he was a real respectful young man. He had a strong faith in God. He was always there. Just a nice young man.
While Patricia and LaToya were carving their own paths, they managed to stay in touch.
For them to still be friends after all of that time says a lot about their relationship and the love they have for each other.
But now, police want to know how LaToya wound up riddled with injuries in the back of a man's vehicle.
That driver I had interviewed, he was immediately looked at as a suspect by Detroit Police Department until he was able to be cleared when LaToya confirmed his story.
Officers aren't able to get much information from LaToya before she's rushed to the hospital, but they alert dispatch that she's on her way.
I got a call in the middle of the night that a young lady had been kidnapped and that my team and I needed to respond and find out what happened to her.
At the time, the information that I was provided is that a male and a female subject had kidnapped another female subject, had placed her in the trunk of the car, and were driving her eastbound on I-94 from the city of Dearborn into the city of Detroit. And at some point during this incident, the female that was in the trunk of the car popped the trunk using the emergency hatch and was able to jump out of the car onto I-94.
Detectives arrive at the hospital hoping LaToya can provide more information about her kidnappers.
She was completely distraught when we first saw her. She was all bandaged up along her arms and her legs. She had cuts along her face. She had just jumped from a car doing approximately 70 miles an hour down the expressway, timing it not to get hit by other cars. So the road rash on her was terrible.
LaToya can barely speak, but what she does say shocks Detective Wilson.
LaToya immediately said, "This was my best friend who did this to me, Patricia Jernigan, and her boyfriend Terrell."
In the early morning hours of October 18, 2015, Dearborn detectives are trying to piece together what happened to 21-year-old LaToya Britton. LaToya claims she was kidnapped by two people, Terrell Smith and her own best friend, Patricia Jernigan.
She's describing her best friend and her best friend's boyfriend capturing her, and he had a gun in hand. The initial conversation with LaToya was very minimal. It was more about taking care of her injuries and working on the information that we had. She said that her cell phone was taken from her. So step one was locate the cell phone, locate Patricia, and locate Terrell. We didn't know if Patricia was a victim in this case or if she was a willing participant. So the goal was to make sure she was safe, because the initial information that we had from LaToya was Terrell was the one with the gun.
I started contacting the cell phone providers to get call detail records as well as their cell tower location information.
While the forensics team works on tracking LaToya Britton's cell phone, Detective Wilson heads over to speak to LaToya, who was just released from the hospital.
The follow-up interview was done in her living room. She was still dealing with her significant injuries. I sat down in the chair in the living room there and spoke with her in detail about this. She starts telling me that Patricia has been her childhood best friend. Patricia was really doing well for herself, that she had a great family, and that once she had met Terrell, that things had just changed, that Terrell, he was very controlling.
Terrell insisted on knowing everything about Patricia's friends, especially LaToya.
She said that Terrell had always been jealous of their friendship, that there's no way that two females could be that close to each other, that have that good of a relationship or friendship. So there was always that jealousy that he harbored for LaToya.
LaToya says she wasn't comfortable with the situation and cut off all contact with Patricia. The two friends did not speak or text for months. Then, in mid-October of 2015, LaToya is contacted by her one-time best friend.
Patricia said she wanted to reconnect their friendship and go to dinner.
Patricia picks LaToya up from her home, and they're on their way to have dinner. Patricia stops the car down the street, and she's like, hey, let me put the restaurant in the GPS, which is normal.
Patricia had grabbed LaToya's cell phone when Terrell had came out of a set of bushes that were around a corner.
LaToya runs down the street. Terrell catches her and hits her in the head with the gun.
He had pushed LaToya into the trunk of the car at that point and had grabbed her breasts and had threatened her to the point where she was fearful and had to cooperate with his demands.
LaToya is saying how she's been forced into this trunk. There's no way that she knows where she's being taken to. She's thinking, I can scream and maybe somebody will hear me. However, she notices that they're turning the music up louder and louder. She's noticing the car is accelerating, so they can't hear, or anybody can't hear her screams.
She said that she was well aware that night she was going to die. Wherever Patricia and Terrell wanted to take her, she wasn't going to survive another day.
LaToya makes the choice that I would rather jump out of a moving vehicle than fear a person taking my life from me.
She remembered looking for that emergency latch in the trunk in order to pull it to hopefully save herself and be able to jump. And when she made that jump and she figured that the timing was safe enough, it's now or never, she was wearing a crossbody purse. The strap had actually caught onto the trunk, so she was dangling for a moment in time, and finally the strap broke. And that's when she was released and tumbled to the ground.
Hearing the details of LaToya's harrowing story raises the stakes for detectives.
The first thing that we do is look at the criminal history. Looking at Patricia's history, she had a very minimal history. There was no reason that she should be involved in something this heinous. But then looking forward at Terrell's history, criminal history, it was extensive. And in fact, he already had a conviction for a previous kidnapping.
On October 17, 2015, a botched kidnapping left LaToya Britton physically and psychologically battered. The next morning, two suspects, Terrell Smith and Patricia Jernigan, are still on the loose, and detectives have only LaToya's missing cell phone to work with.
Initially, with the cell phone pings, we were able to get those under what's called exigent circumstances. And essentially at that point, what we are saying is that there is an emergency, that there's a risk of somebody being hurt and or killed, and that we need to find, this device because we believe it's going to lead us to the suspects.
But someone had turned LaToya's phone off. so there was no way to track the device. Investigators turned to social media as a possible way to find the suspect's location.
In this case, when we were able to serve the search warrant on to the social media sites, we asked them to expedite it due to the nature of the crime, and that we needed to find these people right away, which they were able to do for us.
In the early morning hours of October 19th, the local internet service provider contacts detectives with an IP address that is pinging from inside of a residence located on Detroit's east side.
Once we received this information back from the providers, we in turn gave it to our undercover officers.
Several Detroit PD units quickly scrambled and raced to the address to get into position.
Our undercover crew was watching the house and monitoring any movement that was taking place in the house. That's when they were able to see Terrell, but without him coming out of the house, there was no way to make a safe approach into the house, knowing that Terrell was armed with a handgun.
Just after 1 p.m., detectives observed Terrell drive away in a silver Neon, registered to Patricia Jernigan.
At that point, our undercover team that was watching the house had begun to follow and tail him, calling out every move that he made, every turn. Most people, when they're being followed, are completely unaware, except for he kept looking over his shoulders. You could tell that he was paranoid.
Terrell pulls into a business parking lot and parks near the building.
The parking lot was an area that was ideal for pulling in the undercover cars to surround his car and pin him in. He was taken out of the car and immediately placed on the ground. There wasn't a weapon on him at that point.
As Terrell is taken into custody, Patricia suddenly walks out into the parking lot. Terrell was there to pick her up from work.
Then Patricia came out to see what was happening.
Police came, I seemed like they came out of everywhere, and they screamed and yelled, "I'm under arrest."
And that's when she was brought over to my car. I asked to have a conversation with her about why we were there and what was going on. And we sat down and had a basic girl conversation of what's going on and what information do you have for us.
Yeah, she's like, "You're free to leave, you're not under arrest." It's the only thing I remember. And I remember I kept asking, "I gotta get my son." And she's like, "We gonna let you get your son?"
Patricia's demeanor, I mean, she was nervous. You could hear her voice shaking. You could see the nerves on her. She knew that she needed to give me some sort of story.
First thing is, like, don't tell her the truth, lie. You know, lie, maybe she'll let you go. Because I didn't know, never been in trouble, so it's like, I didn't know.
She said that LaToya had agreed to go to dinner with her and that she was picking her up. There was an argument over some money that LaToya had asked for a cell phone bill. There was some pushing and shoving that occurred, and Patricia had pushed LaToya out of the car, but she denied Terrell's involvement at all during that interaction.
Detectives ask Patricia if she'll come with them to the station for further questioning.
She was quiet the entire ride back to the police department that she agreed to go to. She just sat there quietly, and she kept asking about her son. Her son was her biggest priority. She wanted to get home to her son. She appeared to be remorseful, but she appeared to be very scared and nervous.
On the way to the police station, detectives make Patricia an offer.
I told her that I'd be willing to give her a polygraph in order to clear her from this, in order to see if her story was going to pan out. A truthful person is going to immediately jump all over a polygraph exam. In Patricia's case, she was forthcoming and said, "No, I'm not going to pass this polygraph test."
Two days after the kidnapping of LaToya Britton, Suspects Terrell Smith and Patricia Jernigan are both in custody of the Dearborn police, but only Terrell has been placed under arrest.
At that point, she hadn't done anything to place herself in a position where she would be under arrest, but she knew that we needed to talk further. So she agreed to come back to the Dearborn police station where we drove her.
At the Dearborn headquarters, Detective Wilson sits down alone with Patricia.
It's just Patricia and I having this conversation, and at this time she begins to open up more. She knew that there were some issues that were going on. So she basically recounts the whole incident as LaToya tells me.
Help! I remember that night. I never forget this night. I had to get drunk because I was so out of it. I did not want to do it, but I was stuck between this rock and this hard place. I remember driving over there, and I remember texting her, like, I'm outside.
She says that they were going to go to dinner, that Terrell had went to Dollar General to purchase a toy gun because the intention was to get that money that LaToya was borrowing back. She described that this was the plan, to kidnap her, that she was in on the gun being involved, that she had dropped Terrell off initially in those bushes in order for him to rob her, to point this toy gun in her face.
Patricia tells detectives that once Terrell got in the car, things escalated quickly.
I remember her just screaming and crying like, Trish, for real, Trish, for real. And I'm trying to call it off like, Terrell, leave her alone, just stop. Terrell, leave it alone, like, just stop, leave her alone. But by then it seemed like everything raveling so fast. And I just remember her screaming. And I'm like, Terrell, let her go, just let her go. Just please let her go.
Patricia says it's then that Terrell forces LaToya into the trunk of the car and tells Patricia to keep driving.
And I just look, I see in the rearview mirror the trunk come up. And I heard a boom, boom, boom. And we get off on that first exit, maybe the second. And I see her running. I'm like, Rail, just let her go, let her go, let her go. And get back up on the exit, trying to get her, by then she gone.
It was very clear that Patricia was involved and not a victim at this point. As soon as she had said something that was self-incriminating, she was no longer free to leave.
That's the only thing I do remember. You know, Patricia, you're under arrest. And I just remember, like, can I call Mama to get my son? She said, yeah, I called. And I called her for phone. I'm like, well, I guess they went to my mom's house looking for me. She said, sweetie, what's going on? Where's LaToya? It's police is here. Nah, my mom hysterical crying. So I said, Mom, I'm gonna let the detective tell you.
And she told me, she said, your daughter is involved in a kidnapping. You know, it's serious charges. Patricia's got some serious things against her.
At the conclusion of our interview, she was handcuffed. She was walked downstairs to our booking area, and she was placed in a holding cell until she was formally charged.
On October 23, 2015, just 1 week after the kidnapping of LaToya Britton, Patricia Jernigan and Terrell Smith are arraigned together.
In that courtroom when they were being arraigned, the realization had come that she wasn't going home to her son, that she was in too deep because of this man.
We got arraigned, and I remember standing there next to him. They had us cuffed together. And I remember the judge, like, Patricia, are you aware you standing next to a fourth-time individual?
When Patricia first met Terrell Smith, he seemed like the perfect man for her.
I was in the middle of the church, and he came and approached me, like, can I take him to the vending machine? I'm like, yeah. So I walked with them with Mari to the vending machine. Then he asked me, am I single? I'm like, yeah. He said, you know, you should call me. He said, but, stop like this. He said, but I just want to be honest with you. I'm just getting out of prison and I'm on tether. he's on GPS tether, which means he's being monitored and watched by his parole officer.
She believed that if God can forgive people, who are we not to forgive? You know, but I had, you know, my doubts. You know, this is my daughter, my baby.
He told me in the beginning that he got incarcerated for carjacking. Him and his girlfriend was into it. The car was in her name. He took the car, she reported it, but it was more to it.
Patricia never pressed Terrell on what really landed him in prison.
A lot of times, because you want something so bad, you tend to make excuses. So a lot of red flags are overlooked by the mentality of, I want what I want, so I will overlook that, and then maybe I can fix it.
Things seemed so right in the beginning. It seemed like, okay, you know, Trish, this your person. And he was a gentleman, so respectable. Everything felt right.
Handcuffed together and standing just inches from Terrell, Patricia learns for the first time why he had been in prison before they met. Carrying a concealed weapon, firearm felony, carjacking, and unlawful imprisonment.
And I just remember crying, looked over at him, nothing. He didn't say nothing, no emotion.
Initially, both Patricia and Terrell were charged with the same crimes because of their involvement together. They were charged with kidnapping, torture, criminal sexual conduct in the second degree, and armed robbery.
At this point, I was telling her, sweetie, we just want you to do what is right. Cooperate. Tell the truth. But at this point, she still was not talking because Terrell was still in her head. And it took maybe a couple weeks of me going back and forth, getting in her ear, that she finally started breaking down and being honest of the extent of what had happened that night.
Finally, Patricia requests to meet with Detective Wilson one more time.
This is when she opened up more. She talked about the plan, that LaToya was going to be that conquest for Terrell, that she wanted to make her boyfriend happy. And she said the whole story about giving her money for the cell phone bill, that was all fabricated. That was just something to save herself during the initial interview with me. She talked about the abuse that she had endured through the years while dating Terrell. So she had seen his real gun before and was in fear of him. Her biggest fear was that if she didn't help him and participate and orchestrate this, that she would be killed alongside LaToya at the conclusion of this.
Prosecutors approach Patricia about a possible reduced sentence if she agrees to testify against Terrell Smith.
My lawyer said if I go to trial, I could get more time than him because he wasn't able to get to her if it wasn't for me. They said, you gotta testify, you gotta go to court, you gotta take the stand. I said, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. I was willing to take this 15.
Patricia Jernigan is being held in Wayne County Jail awaiting trial for the attempted kidnapping of LaToya Britton. Prosecutors have offered a reduced sentence if Patricia agrees to testify against Terrell Smith. But so far, she's been too terrified to take the stand against her ex-boyfriend.
I remember crying, talking to my mama, and I remember my mama saying, you know what, sweetie, if you're not trying to testify against him, don't worry about seeing your son. Me and your daddy would get custody of him. It's like, we done. And from that moment, that's when I got the courage to testify.
As prosecutors build a case against Terrell Smith, they learn more about how he was able to so quickly get Patricia on board with his twisted plan.
He wanted to try to prove himself to be that good young man who could be a father figure to Patricia's son.
But after Patricia and Terrell got an apartment together, The relationship turned quickly.
I noticed that he always wanted to see my phone, see who I'm texting, who am I talking to. If I didn't answer his phone call at a certain time or I missed a phone call, then it went from he wanted my Facebook passwords. So I did it, but then it got to him messaging people, seeing who am I talking to, messaging guys acting like me. It just got too much, and then we got to arguing about his controlling ways. And that's when I really saw that dark side of him.
While she was with Terrell, not only was he taking her employment money, her income tax money, her child care, he was taking her child support. He was taking that.
Yeah, I was questioning it. And I'm like, was this a good choice? Am I making the right decision? Like, sweetie, get out of it. But then, you know, I'm on the other side, like, I love him, he loved me. Like, it get better, it get better, it get better. And it didn't. It started off as loving. It started as loving, beautiful. Sex was normal. But as it progressed, it started being like it's forced. Terrell wanted to do threesomes. I wasn't experienced with that, you know? I didn't know. I wasn't into that. But I wanted to please him, wanted to satisfy him.
When the level of intimacy is introduced into any relationship, it then changes the dynamics for the person. A lot of times it's an uncomfortable feeling, but you negate that feeling because you're like, well, he loves me.
It went far as Terrell would meet women off different dating apps and bring them home. Then it went to him trying to get my friends, trying to talk to my friends. He been wanted LaToya. He had this sick obsession with her. He came up with this plan that he wanted LaToya.
Terrell wants to have not only control over Patricia's life, but he also wants to break LaToya.
Yeah, me and Toya stopped being friends because of Terrell. So he got to texting LaToya, acting like me. It was his phone number, but Toya didn't even know my phone number. It was him. Acting like me and him broke up. I don't know, it's like he had a hold on me, like some ungodly hold on me.
Even behind the thick walls of jail, Terrell tries to control Patricia.
What he was doing in the interim between the arraignment and the trial, he somehow found a way to get messages to Patricia in jail to get her not to talk or to flip on him.
Still won't let me be free. You took so much from me. You still won't let me go.
Terrell's trial finally begins on April 13th, 2016. On the morning Patricia was scheduled to testify, she didn't think she could pull it off.
You get bonded over to Frank Murphy, you know, the big court. I'm terrified, like, I'm scared. And I just remember the bailiff, the officer opening the door. Are you ready? As I'm walking, I'm crying, and I stop. He said, you can do this. I just remember him telling me, you can do this. You're gonna be okay.
Facing charges of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, armed robbery, and criminal sexual conduct, Terrell Smith goes on trial in April of 2016. His former girlfriend and alleged co-conspirator, Patricia Jernigan, is the prosecution's star witness.
And they asked me this hard question was, what was he gonna do to her? And I told her, he was gonna rape her. He wanted me to watch. Toya, She screams, "Trish," and that's when I just got to crying.
The entire truth behind it was that the plan was to kidnap, rape, and then kill LaToya. LaToya didn't know about it. Normally, if I know about it, I would give the victim a heads up. I didn't know until Patricia was up on that stand talking about it. So when it came out, LaToya's reaction was so raw, which made it even more raw for Patricia. The jury ended up finding Terrell guilty on all counts. He was subsequently sentenced to 42 to 65 years at the Michigan Department of Corrections that he's serving out in northern Michigan at this time.
In return for her testimony, Patricia is given a reduced sentence.
And the sentencing, the judge told Patricia what the verdict was. It had been passed down. And, you know, her time would be 5 to 15 years. And we looking at her with tears. At this point, I've never seen my husband cry. He's looking at her with tears. I'm looking at her with tears. We're constrained. It's nothing we can do to help her.
I have this saying where I'm built to last. That's who I say I am. My first 2 years was hard. I lost my daddy. My daddy died. And the hardest thing is burying somebody in prison. That's the hardest thing ever. And I never got to apologize to my daddy. Like, I never got to deeply apologize to him. And I always had, like, this thing in my mind that, like, I put so much grief and burden on my daddy that helped kill him. Like, you know, you think like that.
With good behavior and credit for time served, Patricia is eligible for parole after 4.5 years in prison.
I remember going to the parole agent, and I just remember, like, just, you want to get out of here? Just be honest. And he asked me, like, why are you here? And I told him. I said I was so in love with this man. This man had such a hold on me that I didn't care about nothing or no one. I was willing to do any and everything for this man. And I remember his answer was like, that's it. He said, you got a question for me? I'm like, do I got my parole? He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, yes, after 5 years, I'm going home.
For Patricia, full recovery will take some time.
Why am I choosing to do it now? To help with my journey. I'm tired of, like, keeping this a secret. Because how am I ever going to heal for something if I'm keeping this a secret? Because he had messed me up in so many areas that I'm trying to still recover and rebuild myself as a woman.
Unfortunately, we see a lot of these circumstances to where women are put into positions to where they end up doing something that they don't necessarily want to do because of the actions of their partners.
She knew in her heart that it didn't feel right, but she couldn't reach out and she couldn't ask for that help. So I would just encourage people to reach out and ask for that help because it is there and it is available, and you don't have to be stuck in a situation like this.
With any woman, we have intuition. Learn how to stop ignoring your intuition. Learn how to ask for the things that you need.
For LaToya Britton, her journey to recovery is also just beginning.
For LaToya, I mean, this is something that will never go away. It will haunt her forever, not only mentally, but the physical scars that are on her.
Toya, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That's all I can say. I'm sorry. I'd do anything to take that night back. I'd do it. But now it's just like, I guess silence is the best. Because now we're grown. We're 31. So it's like so much time had passed, and I just hope one day she could ever forgive me. One day.
When someone is blinded by passion, it can be all-consuming, causing all rationale to go out the window. When that happens, we can sacrifice the friendships we cherish most and imperil their lives. And once those ties are shattered, they may never be repaired.